War. It doesn't really matter which war we talk about, the sense of hopelessness remains the same. Living through such horrific times meant that nobody really knew when their next breath might be their last. A sense of protecting oneself and one's family took over. People were left with a sense of the need for preservation in the face of such vulnerability. It's not just in historic accounts of war itself that we can see evidence of such efforts to preserve oneself and one's memory. At the start of World War II, many authors of the time, quite determined to leave traces of themselves behind, were drawn to stay in London so they could draw on their experiences in their literary works, telling the stories of the war through the eyes of the people who lived through the war, therefore preserving the memories of it forevermore. Take Elizabeth Bowen, who remained in London, and in her book The Heat of the Day has her main character put everything she holds dear into storage. Stella Rodney had taken this flat furnished, having given up the last of her own houses and stored her furniture when the war began. And a more modernist thinking T.S. Eliot exploring preservation of past memory and one's relationship in The Cocktail Party.
You will have to live with those memories and make them into something new. Only by acceptance of the past will you alter its meaning.
Although slightly different to the situations of the likes of Bowen and Eliot, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children covers this theme of preservation in several ways, some far more literally than we'd come to expect. Midnight's Children tells the story of a child, Salim Sinai, born at the exact moment of Indian independence. It goes on to map the fate of India over many years against Salim's life and upbringing, with Rushdie including much historical and political truth among the fiction. Rushdie himself, although having spent much of his life in England, was born in India around the time the British left, and the idea for the novel was born from his own family's joke about the two events potentially being linked. Although Rushdie says that the novel is semi-autobiographical, he is not professing to being the bearer of mystical powers, but rather of drawing on his own experiences and surroundings during his own childhood to shape the people and the places in the story.
I was born in Bombay, in the house that I use in the book, really. Probably the most autobiographical thing in the book is the places in it. I mean, the house in the book is the house that I grew up in, and the school that Salim goes to is the school that I went to. And the bit of Bombay that the book knows is the bit that I grew up in.
Salim believes he is dying.
Please believe that I am falling apart. I've begun to crack all over like an old jug.
Salim is in a hurry to finish writing down his life story so his and his now dead family's history, along with the whole of India's, can be preserved for his son. With many of his ancestors' lives having already been cut short, and his country nearly always having been on the brink of a war and or a political collapse, he has a deep-seated fear of his next breath being his last and running out of time to preserve all that he wishes to. However, it's not just in his autobiography that his past will be remembered. This might look just like an ordinary jar of chutney, and it certainly seems this way if we look at the ingredients list. But what if tagged on the end of our onion, chilli and vinegar here, we had bitterness, jealousy, regret? That would be somewhat more unexpected. We all have smells and tastes that take us back to our childhood. Mine is bay leaf, and it's not a pleasant memory. But what if the meals we ate tasted of the emotions of the person that made them? Or our grandparents could pass on some of their wisdom, apathy or despair through their favourite recipe of samosa. In Midnight's Children, this literal theme of preservation runs all the way through.
Things, even people, have a way of leaking into each other, I explain, like flavours when you cook. Amina began to feel the emotions of other people's food seeping into her, because Reverend Mother doled out the curries and meatballs of intransigence, dishes imbued with the personality of their creator. Amina ate the fish salans of stubbornness and the biryanis of determination. Mary's pickles had a partially counteractive effect, since she had stirred into them the guilt of her heart and the fear of discovery, so that, good as they tasted, they had the power of making those who ate them subject to nameless uncertainties and dreams of accusing fingers.
For Selim, writing his history down is not enough. It is bottled and preserved, literally, in jars of pickle, each labelled with a chapter of his life that match those of the novel. It is also no accident that Selim's nose is compared to a cucumber and also resembles the map of India in the novel. India's history, much like cucumbers, is being pickled.
And my chutneys and kasundis are, after all, connected to my nocturnal scribblings. By day amongst the pickle vats, by night within these sheets.
I spend my time at the great work of preserving. Memory, as well as fruit, is being saved from the corruption of the clocks.
But why pickles? We're going to have to look a little bit further afield to find that out.
Food legacies in India are plentiful. From the spice trade to biryanis, their influences can be seen worldwide. With such a hot climate dictating a great need for solutions for preserving food, pickling is a necessary process. The history of pickles in India is a legacy in itself and can be traced back over 4,000 years. This legacy of pickles even appears in other novels. If we look at The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, Roy claims to have taken inspiration from Midnight's Children and Rushdie's inclusion of pickles in the novel for her Padma's pickles.
By pickling something, whether food or thought, we give it a sort of immortality in its pickled state, now not to be altered, unlike maybe the interpretation of the written word or an oral tale, perhaps. The very nature of this chutnification of history preserves things in such a manner that somebody somewhere in the future can open a jar and replicate the memory in its exact state. One day, Selim's son can open a jar and experience a heightened infusion of his grandmother's fury, agonise over his father's deep love for his sister, or realise there was once a grand vision of a preserved and peaceful political state. In much the same way, readers of Midnight's Children will scan the pages and have Rushdie's memories pickled in ink.
Independence, despite the blood and the gore and the terrible mistakes and the partitions and all that, was nevertheless some kind of a time of optimism, that people felt a sense of possibility, that, you know, the imperialists had been removed and there was a new country that was their country. And people of my parents' generation all say that they felt this, that despite all the flaws in the event, it was a time of hope.
My special blends. I've been saving them up. Symbolic value of the pickling process. All the 600 million eggs which gave birth to the population of India could fit inside a single standard-sized pickle jar. 600 million spermatozoa could be lifted on a single spoon. Every pickle jar, you will forgive me if I become florid for a moment, contains, therefore, the most exalted of possibilities, the feasibility of the chutnification of history, the grand hope of the pickling of time.
Even with all this in mind, there is still something we haven't yet considered: longevity.
Pickles do not need refrigeration and therefore travel well and were designed for taking on long journeys. If something is pickled, then it's almost guaranteed to last longer. By pickling his history as well as writing it down, Selim is trying to ensure his legacy remains long after his body has left the earth. Although even in a book full of magic, it is acknowledged that his methods still aren't foolproof.
In words and pickles, I have immortalized my memories. Although distortions are inevitable in both methods, we must live, I'm afraid, with the shadows of imperfection.
By the end of the novel, we see Selim leaving a jar empty as he goes off in the belief he is about to die. His duty of record-keeping preservation might be done, but he ensures the path and the expectation is laid down for the story to continue.
One day, perhaps, the world may taste the pickles of history. They may be too strong for some palates, their smell may be overpowering, tears may rise to eyes. I hope, nevertheless, that it will be possible to say of them that they possess the authentic taste of truth, that they are despite everything, acts of love.